listening to the news and listening to everything that's been going on all around us. And we're listening to so much that's been said about COVID-19 and hearing all the negative things and the negative comments and everything that was taking place, the sickness, the illness, the disagreement with governmental decisions, all kinds of things that were going on. But this week I took a little opportunity, because I've had a couple of things happen to me in my own personal life, to reflect a little more closely on COVID-19. And one of the things I envisioned when I started reflecting on this was the fact that, number one, I have no power. Number two, I have no control. That was a realization to me. It really was. After looking at everything that was transpiring, going all around, a lot of times what happened was I resorted to the fact that I believed as an individual in a country that believes so much on self-reliance that I could actually have control and do something about the situation. I wasn't in the medical field. I wasn't doing research. I wasn't a government leader making decisions. I wasn't a church leader having to have to make decisions. I was just an individual in society who had all these things going on around him. And it made me realize and reflect as I look now at Sally coming across the Gulf of Mexico, and I look at Laura and what it has done to Lake Charles. And I'm sitting back and realizing there's got to be something more powerful than me that has control. It's not me. And all the controversy that I begin to see on television and social media and people who have lost hope in politicians, it made me realize that within our particular society, there are so many people who lack hope. And what happens is they're in their daily routine and they're doing things and they're just moving from one thing to another without taking the realization of trying to reflect upon what can they do, what effect and what thing could happen to us. And then I started to reflect this. Once again, this happened to be my week in rotation, where I began to have the opportunity to do the homily. And by doing the homily, it caused me a little bit more in depth to reflect upon the readings of the week. And as I went through this last week, the 23rd week of Ordinary Time, and listened to all the stories that were transpired and taking place with the theme of love, I realized how much God loved me. And I realized how much God had mercy on me. And I had to try to put all this in perspective. And then all of a sudden I turn around, and in the 24th week, holy mackerel, I open up with the comments from the book of Sirach. And man, it made me realize as I reflected upon this fact, how much God had told the Jewish people in the Old Testament and in the Scriptures. How much reflection God gave to them. How much direction He gave to them. And each time they fell in the covenant, He too had the love and the mercy and the compassion to be able to get them through it and give them another chance. You know, one of the things that happens to me is I realize all these things going on around me in my life have a reason. And I need to take the opportunity to reflect upon them and stop and slow down and maybe look towards something that can give me hope. Not make me become despairing and feel like I'm alone in the things that are going on. And to me, the thing that gives me hope is Scripture. And we see that in the gospel today. What do we see in the gospel today? We see a man who is developing in his faith as he traveled for 3 years with Jesus. And what he does is he turns to ask Jesus a question about the Scriptures in the past and the thing that's going on, because he too wanted to learn from Jesus. He too realized that if we wanted to be able to succeed in what we're doing within our life, we needed to go to Scripture and we needed to go to God. So he turns to God and he says, how many times do I forgive my brother? Do I do it 7? And he said, no, 7 times 77. An infinite number of times we take the opportunity to do this. But to try to make him better understand, he gives him a parable about the way God thinks. And when he gives him a parable about the way God thinks, he uses the example of a king who had a person who came to him, a debtor, who continually failed, and because of his failure, owed him a lot of money. How would they handle that in our life, in the humanness we have now? They'd bring you to court, they'd get us an attorney, all things would transpire and take place. But no, in following the path that God chooses, God says eventually, yes, I'm going to forgive him. Jesus gives the message of the parable because what he does is he takes the young man and he gives him the forgiveness of his debt. But the young man doesn't learn. How many times in our lives do we not learn? And what he does is he turns around after he had just been forgiven a tremendous debt, and he turns and he goes into society and someone owes him money. And what does he do? He demands payment. He chokes the guy, uses every constraint that he could possibly use to be able to set a direction on this person. Boy, when the king finds this out, what happens is the king turns to this individual and says, you're going to the torturers. I'm going to cast judgments because the key is in that last sentence. He didn't have a change of heart. That becomes the key of what we do. And that's why the sacrament of confession is so crucial and so very, very important. He didn't have a change of heart. And because he didn't have a change of heart, he lost his hope. And he turned back to his self-reliance, and he turned back to his bad ways. You know, I've had two things happen to me in my life which have really hit me square right in the face with a 2x4. I have two daughters that live in Lake Charles. And my two daughters that live in Lake Charles, I've seen the destruction and everything that they've gone through. I've seen one of my daughters go home and as she's there with her husband and taking care and gutting their house out completely and having to have to put a new roof on it, their garage and their fences and all the things that are going on. And today, as of last night, she still did not have electricity. My other daughter has electricity, and she's got something now that she can work with and be able to start setting some direction. But you know, a little story happened this week when we talked on the phone with my daughter. And it was a good story because it gave me an opportunity as an evangelist in the church and as one who wants to try to get my children to believe in God and to follow the scriptures and believe the right way. And a little story that happened was that they were, Jennifer and her husband were gutting everything out of their house, taking everything out. Her front lawn, even though they have a dumpster for the roofer would not allow them to put all the sheetrock and all the insulation and everything else that fell out of the ceilings in that dumpster. And it's all piled up on our front lawn. And what happens is a roofer came out. And it's important because once you get the roof on, then you can start doing all the internal things that you need to do. And what happened was she went across the street. And as she was sitting across the street in the neighbor's driveway, watching the roofer put on the roof, all of a sudden she noticed in the distance a rainbow. And she sat back and she said, you know, I have to realize there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think each and every one of us needs to understand that too, is what happens when those apostles are in that boat with Jesus, and they're in the rocky road and the ship and the storm and everything that's going on. And he stood up. Now we see who has the power. He stood up and calmed the seas. He stood up and made the storm calm. And when he did that, calm came, and the apostles felt saved because they went to Jesus, and they were reinstilled with hope because they went where they could find power in the scriptures and in Jesus Christ. You know, I think about Jennifer saying that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think about every one of us. How many times do we wake up in the morning or during the day, reflect on the fact that in our baptism, one of the things that transpires in that baptism is they tell you to receive the light of Christ.